to die. I scarce can take it in that on the cross my burden gladly bearing, He bled and died to take away my sin. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. When Christ shall come with shout of acclamation, and take thee home, what joy shall fill my heart? Then I shall bow in humble adoration, and there proclaim, my God, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
Our God, our Father in heaven, we come in now thankful for the day you've given us to live here together here tonight, Father, to see forth your word. We pray, Father, that everything said and done here always complete according to thy will and thy law, thy word. Remind them, Father, those that are not with us tonight, those who are sick, those who physically facing serious diseases and illnesses, that you be with them and those ministers to them. If you be the way possible, grant them a portion of health and they can turn back and be with us. Not Father, the situation is far over. We pray for relief of this nation and other nations, Father, as peace. Some will be reestablished and working under the sun. We know, Father, that because of men's greed, men's ideas, and men's own loves, this continues. Continue to bless us, continue to watch us, continue to keep us in that area. Let's pray in Jesus' name.
First Samuel, chapter number 29. We're getting close to the end of the reign of Saul. David is still in a position as a fugitive from the kingdom. He's been in the land of the Philistines, and our last time we got together, he was serving Achish, the king, and now that particular phase of his life is getting ready to end as well. One thing about this particular time frame in David's life, it's a pretty extensive period of time. They don't know exactly, but there's quite a few years that transpire from the time that Samuel dies until David takes the kingship. Some say as much as 20 to 22 years was the time frame, but they're not exactly sure on that. All right, well, let's read 1 Samuel chapter 29. First, we'll go over some questions on that, and then we'll go from there to see how far we get in it. Miss Emily, you want to read?
And the lords of the Philistines passed on by thousands, but David and his men passed on to his reward with Achish. And the princes of the Philistines led these Hebrew spirits. And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, Is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days, or these years, and I have found no fault in him, which he brought unto me unto this day. And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him, and the princes of the Philistines said unto him, Make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of his men? Is not this David, of whom they sang one to another and danced and saying, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000. And Achish called David and said unto him, Surely as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out, and thy coming in with me in the host is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favor not.
Wherefore now return and go with thee, if thou displease not the Lord that he said. And David said to Achish, But what have I done, and what hast thou found in thy servant, so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of the Lord the king? And Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in my sight, as an angel of God, notwithstanding the princes of the Philistines have said, He shall not go up with us to battle. Wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning, and have light to depart. So David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning, to return into the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel.
All right, very good. Thank you. Question number 1. Where was David as the Philistine armies lined up to fight? 1 and 2. Verses 1 and 2. Where was David when all this was taking place? In the back. In the back of what? Back of the army. Which army? Alright, so we know that the Philistines are the enemy of Israel. They have been for a long time. They fought many wars, and we have David at the back of the line of the enemies of God's people, falling in ranks with the enemies of God's people in that day. That's kind of how it would be in this day to some degree if you have people who are members of the church maybe who are not faithful, who are standing against what the Bible teaches as far as truth in any doctrine. They will stand behind what denominational people teach and defend that to or against God's people, the church, on many occasions. But David is on the wrong side of the battle right now, based upon what? When we looked at David in the past, how did he end up here? All right. He knew that it was all possible that Saul was going to kill him. But how did he end up down here with the enemy? He was running from Saul. We know that. But why go here? Had not God protected him every time that he had gone, had come after him in some way, form, or fashion? The providence of God had protected him. Why was he here with the enemy now? He had given up. He had gotten distraught about the situation, got tired of the fight, and so he determined that he would go there. One thing that we did look at when David made that decision, he did not call upon God or talk to God about any, as far as getting direction from him, and so by not doing that, he ended up in this position, being with the enemy when they're starting to fight against God's people. All right, number 2, what was pointed out by the Philistine princes? Verse number 3. Who was among them? Have I got the right verse? Let's see. Then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these? Alright, so what did they point out? There were Hebrews there. How did they know that they were Hebrews? Can you point out a Hebrew today? You today?
We can, but like you go over the Middle East and they can pretty much pick out what to say. Differences are.
In this day and age, and even that, when you get to the real conservative Jews today, they have a certain dress to them. They do certain things. Their manners are all things that, and so in that land, in those people, you can tell the difference between an Arab and a Jew. You can tell the difference in all those, and so they stood out in that respect. And just the point that I drew from it as far as, can you tell the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian today? How? Okay, so there is a distinct difference between, or should be, between how a Christian acts as to what those in the world do, where they go, how they dress, how they speak. All of those characteristics or qualities are things that stand out. So it's a picture for us that they were able to know the Jews there that we can draw a conclusion that people know us in that respect when we are living a godly life or trying to live like God would have us do, just like the Jews were supposed to back then. But it wasn't David's actions necessarily on this occasion that was made him stand out. It had to have been his appearance more than his actions. But because he was in the enemy's army and he'd been with the enemy for a long time. But just if you want to look at it from that standpoint, people know if you've been in the past trying to live a Christian life and you're not anymore, people know. People recognize the difference between those who are truly living the Christian life and those who aren't.
Just like having like Amish and those,
Yeah.
see them right away.
Yeah. And their manner of life and how they dress and that sort of thing is what they believe to be, the Christian life or whatever it is that would be. So it is distinct in that respect.
I just think that would be, like then they're probably the dress probably was obvious to people, especially back then.
All right. So, but it was obvious to those in leadership that they didn't fit. They weren't in the right situation, or they were not to be a part of that group. All right, number 3, why were the leaders angry with Achish? Verse number 4.
Anybody we can turn on?
All right. They had a concern, even if we were to go back and look at some of the other studies when Saul was fighting, or when the Philistines were fighting against the Israelites, and Saul called for the people to come fight with him. There had been many that had defected to the Philistines or gone to live with them, and when the Jews or the Israelites were being victorious, then they also turned and went back and started fighting with Saul on those occasions. So that there was a history there of them being getting out of the ranks, but when things started turning for the good, that they would go back to what they were, and they were afraid that they would fall under those same set of circumstances, and that by using the slaughter of the Philistines, or the heads of the Philistines, it says, he could show to the Israelites that he was truly serving or trying to work for God and the Israelites. What was noted about David by the Philistines? Verse number 5. Okay. And when was this particular thing that was said about him? All right. David was coming into Jerusalem after what? Specifically, that was right after David had slain Goliath. When all this was said, Saul had slain his 1,000, David his 10,000. That was specific in of what sect or what nationality was Goliath. Philistine. How does David, and they know this about David, how is he able to be right there in the middle of that group of people, having killed Goliath and been an arch enemy of all those people all these times, and yet they're even letting him live at this point. He's got 600 men there in the midst of a whole Philistine army, and yet nothing happens to him. Why do you think that is? Providence of God, for sure. All right. Number 5. What did Achish say about David? Verse number 6.
He said, I can go right in all the time.
I can depend on him. He's been fair and honest with me. He's never done anything that would cause me to doubt him whatsoever. What do we know about David all this time? What had he been doing? Remember, he's going out and killing all Israel's enemies and telling Achish that he was going out and fighting against the Jews. So he had been basically lying to him the whole time about what he was doing, and Achish believed everything and thought David was a great hero and doing all his bidding and that sort of thing. So that would tell us a little bit about the reality of life, that people may believe something about us that is completely opposite of what we are. Or we could put it another way, we can be misleading about our character with people, and they'll think we're just as good as gold, when realistically we're not as good as what the world thinks. The standard, what's the standard got to be as far as how we live our lives? Christ has got to be the standard of what God thinks about us, and we can't live our lives based upon what people think about us, for good or for bad. But many times we let what other people think about us dictate how we act, what we do, whether it's true or false. 6. What was David's reaction to being kicked out of the battle by the Philistines? Verse number 8. Yeah, he was acting like I'm a little indignant. What have I done? How good a fighter I am, and here y'all are not wanting me to participate. What do you think about that? Was David being sincere along those lines? Absolutely. David was between a rock and a hard place. He was going to be fighting. Either he had to tell a story in some way to get out of it, or he had to go fight against the children of Israel. So there was no win situation for David right here. But yet he didn't want to let in to the fact that he was not what he was presenting. The Lord had given him opportunity to get out from underneath what he had put himself into, basically, with this situation right here. And so David was trying to get out of it and save face, so to speak. 7. What did Achish refer David to? Verse number 9. What did he call him? An angel of God. That is completely contradictory to how David had been acting the whole time that he had been in this relationship with Achish and the Philistines. So it just goes again to show that people can be very deceptive as far as their character is concerned. How should we act towards people? What should we think about people based upon that? What did Ronald Reagan say there? Trust but verify. Give people the benefit of the doubt, but don't give them the keys to the castle. You have to be wary, especially nowadays. I think it's gotten worse in the sense that you have to double check, basically, with the way people are acting nowadays. But David was an example of a man who had turned in the wrong direction, that God gave him the benefit because of his heart and his desire to do the right thing, a way to get out of the conditions or the consequences that he had put himself in. Is that a guarantee for us in that respect? Had David died in this situation, would David have been in the right relationship with God, you think? Lying about who he was, lying to Achish, misleading people. Is the Bible justifying any of this stuff? Is the Bible saying that the grace of God will help us get through that and it'll be okay? You're playing with fire is what I think in that respect. If you know that something's wrong, you've got to fix it. And if you know that you're acting wrong, you've got to get out of it. So David was in a bad place. I don't believe David, that's just my opinion, but David was in a bad place. All right? So we can't use the example of David's life right here as an example of how God will take care of us when we're not doing the right thing. Number 9, that goes to, or number 8 goes to chapter 30. So let's read chapter 30 and then we'll look at a few questions along that line to kind of finish up for tonight. Trina, you want to read? Start reading for us on 30 and verse 1.
It came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day that the Amplifies had invaded the south, and Ziklag, and smitten Ziklag, and burnt it with fire, and had taken the women captives that were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David. And David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, Pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. So David went, he and the 600 men that were with him, and came to the brook Besor, where those that were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 abode behind, which were so faint that they could not go over the brook Besor.
And they found an Egyptian in the field, and brought him to David, and gave him bread, and he did eat. And they made him drink water, and they gave him a piece of cake of fig, and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit came again to him, and he had eaten no bread, nor drunk any water 3 days and 3 nights. And David said unto him, To him belongeth thou, and whence that art thou? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to Untitled and to my master. Let me, because 3 days ago I fell sick.
Oh, shall we read it?
We had made a raid against the neighbor of the Providence and against that which belongs to Judah, and against the people of Caleb, and we burned Zillah with fire. And David said to him, Will you take me down to this bank? And he said, Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this bank. And when he had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of the great spoil that was taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judea. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. And not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled.
How are you read it?
David recovered all the Amalekites and carried away. And David rescued his 2 wives. And there was nothing lacking to them in their small parade, neither their sons nor daughters, nor anything that they had taken in their hands nor all. They took all the flocks and the herds which they drave, or was other cattle, and said, This is David's spoil.
County will read 21.
And there came 200 men which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide at the brook Besor. And they went forth to meet David, and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. Then answered all the wicked men and men of Gilead, of those that went with David, and said, Because they went not with us, we will not give them all of the spoil that we have recovered. Save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. Then said David, Ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord hath given us, who hath served us and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. For who will hearken unto you in this matter, that as his heart is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his heart be that tarrieth by the stuff, they shall depart alike. And it was so from that day forward, that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent send up the scroll unto the elders of Judah, even to his friends, saying, Behold, the present for you of the scroll of the enemies of the Lord, to them which were in Bethel, and to them which were in the south of Raymond, and to them which were in Jatir, and to them which were in Arad, and to them which were in Sidon, and to them which were in Ishmael, and to them which were in Rochelle, and to them which were in cities of the Jerebites, and to them which were in the cities of the Kenites, and to them which were in the Hormah, and to them which were in Chorazin, and to them which were in Attack, and to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to walk.
I didn't quite get that. Would you go back and start at number 28 and read? I started to say right there when you got down by 27, I started to give you a hint, just pass it on. You just kept on going. So, you did good. That's good. All right, so David leaves the army, being kicked out by the Philistine princes, and goes back and finds his hometown of Ziklag had been overrun and burned to the ground, and everybody captured there. All right. Question number 8. That's what happened. Question number 9. Why did David encourage himself in the Lord? Verses 5 and 6. Okay, he had a reason to be upset. He lost his wives, all the families of everybody surrounded him. But there's one other thing that you can see. Yeah, he was in jeopardy of losing his life. He was the leader. He had not left anybody behind to protect the city or to watch out for those people. He had not made wise decisions. A lot of times what happens when something bad happens in an organization, Eric, it goes bad. Who do they point the finger at, David? Yeah, the leaders get the finger pointed at them, people get upset with them, and that's what basically happened to David right here, I think. He was the one that received the blame, not necessarily because it was his fault, but was the saying, the buck stops here. Well, whether right or wrong, whether justified or unjustified, that happened to David. And so he was standing by himself again, with everybody turned on him, and so it says that he encouraged himself in the Lord. David, even when he did bad things, he still had God on his mind, and so he strengthened himself there in the Lord. What's a good sign for that? Number 10, what did David do before pursuing the Amalekites? All right, specifically, he wanted to hear from God. How did he hear from God? How did God communicate with the Israelites back then? Through the ephod, which was the thing that the high priest wore, and usually the way that worked is they would ask a specific question of God through the high priest, and God would answer through that a yes or a no. And he's been told yes on occasion to go, and so that's what he's trying to do, is to find out what he would need to do. Did David know where these people were at this time? He didn't have a clue what was going on. He just knew that the town was gone, it was burned to the ground, and the people were gone. But he knew nothing else. And he was trying to figure out what to do. And so he went to God to get the answers that he needed. And God told him to pursue. All right. So how many men went with David to catch the Amalekites?
400.
All right. There were 600 total. There were 400 that went with him, and 200 stayed behind with the things that they brought. They had with the bags, it says. One thing that I did notice, or in the commentary that I read, was that from where David and his men were with the Philistines to Ziklag, they didn't know the exact number, but it was somewhere between 40 and 80 miles. How long a hike is that in the military time there, Ron? Now, if you had to go 80 miles.
You go 80 miles, so 6 hours for 20 miles.
So they got up early in the morning, and let's just say it was 50 miles. That was a full day's hike. All right. Yeah. All right, so they did a full day's hike to get from the Philistines home, and they get home, and then they find out that it's wiped out. So now you're talking about 600 men, and 400 have got enough energy or strength to move forward to try to do this. If you had to go another half a day after doing that, there would be a few that would be falling out. And so we can understand the situation there. Of course, you've got the providence of God involved in this as well. So, but still, people have to have the drive and the energy, and of course, with their family on the line, and they would have an extra set incentive to go.
That's what adrenaline kicks in.
Yeah. All right. Number next. How many men went with David? 400 out of the 600. How did David find the Amalekites? Verses 11 through 15. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know where they were at. How did they find out where the Amalekites were? All right, they just happened upon an Egyptian slave. What would we call that? Providence of God. You know, we're talking about situations where everything's stretched to the very ultimate end as far as human ability, and yet they're able to do more. And then something comes up that helps them get to where they need to be to do what they have to do. Can we take something from this particular situation? I'm not talking about a full day's hike. I'm not talking about having to pursue after being all the way down to the very last of all your resources. What can we take from that? No matter what. If we're going to be faithful to God when we've got a problem, no matter what the size of the problem is, when we get to the end of our road, Christ is going to be there to provide for us in some form or fashion. Is what this story is kind of giving us a bit of details about. We don't know the answers when we're going, but we know what we have to do. David knew what he had to do. Those men knew what they had to do, and they were willing to go, and God provided for them the things that they needed to be able to accomplish what they set out to do. All right? So they found this Egyptian slave. It's interesting, what I was reading is, why didn't they just kill all the people in Ziklag? What had David done to those Amalekites and those people when he was going around fighting from Ziklag and going into those battles that Achish thought he was going into Judea to kill? What was he doing? He was destroying man, woman, child, everything on there. And now we have this same group of people that David had been doing this against, where he's killing everybody, and suddenly they don't kill a single person. How's that possible? What would we call that? The providence of God. Yeah, most of the time, these people knew what David had done as far as destroying all them, and yet they did not do it. Now, the commentary said that it was probably along the lines of they had an Egyptian slave here. There was slave trade between these people and Egypt, and so they had slaves coming from Egypt, and they could possibly have taken those people and sold them as slaves into Egypt, and so they had a financial reason not to do it. But even in making that determination, that was a part of the providence of God as well. That's the reason why they didn't do it. Number 13, how many of David's followers were killed in the situation with the Amalekites? They went in to fight against them. How many people died? None. None of the hostages that were taken from Ziklag, the women and the children, none of his men were killed. Why not? Any ideas along those lines? All right, God was with them, but also the Egyptian had told them, not only had they gone and invaded and destroyed Ziklag, but there were 2 or 3 other places that they went. They had an abundant amount of spoil and great gifts, and they had great victories, and they were having a big party. They weren't prepared to fight anything, and so David, even though he was just worn out, his men were just worn out, when they finally came up on this group of people, even a bigger army than what they had, they were in no condition to fight because of the way that they were acting and living and celebrating the things that had gone on. So it was by the providence of God that they got there when they got there, and those people were in the condition that they were in. And so that's what allowed for David, even for being outnumbered in a situation where they were just completely worn out, to be victorious. So we see the hand of God working all through this situation here for David and his men. Number 14, what problem developed after the victory? Verses 21 through 25. They brought the spoil back to get back to Ziklag. All right, they did not feel like they had deserved to get any of the goods of that. They had collected theirs. What was David's reaction to that?
Same stuff goes to them that went to you.
Okay, he said this is the way it's set up. They're a part of the group. They have worked with us. They stayed with the stuff. They have a partner in all that goes on here, and they're going to get a share just like everybody else. One thing that the Bible says, if you look in this particular section, it says, verse number 22, then answered all the wicked men and the men of Belial of those that went with David and said, because they went not with us, we will not give them all of the spoil that we recovered, save every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. How does the Bible describe these men that wanted to withhold from them? Wicked. Men of the devil would be a term there. So they were not acting in a certain way. What does that tell us about some of the people who were with them? Were they upstanding, good, quality people? No, not by the standards of what the Scriptures say. So we can learn something about organizations and churches and groups all together. That there are some good in it and there are some bad in it. And so you can't make your determinations in life based upon the people, especially when you talk about the church. You know, you can't determine the church based upon the people. You have to look at the church as far as Christ, who died for you, and the standard and the doctrine is the standard that we live by. And if we use other people as the guide for whether or not we're going to be faithful to the Lord, we're going to miss out. Number 15. What did David do with the part of the spoil? Verses 26 through 31. Chandler, could you read that for us real quick? Nope. So we'll know what he did? Alright. Minus all the names of the cities, what David did was what? Take part of the spoil and share it among all the different towns and people where he had been in Judah when he was running from Saul. Why would David do that? They had nothing to do with the battle. Alright, so he was showing gratitude for their support. Also, is getting close to the end of Saul's reign, and David's going to be needing people to be supporting him even more. And so he's sharing among to build support for himself as he ascends to the throne, which will take place here just in the next chapter, in the beginning of 2 Samuel chapter 1. Any questions or comments? All right. Chandler, you got an invitation hymn you might want to lead us in?
Thank you for being here tonight. Before we extend the Lord's invitation, do we have any announcements that we need to make? The congregation aware of? Sister Sue, can you pray for her? Brother Ronnie, Brother Roy. It's good to see Sister Edna with us. Sister Ramona Bell, Elmo and J.J. Douglas, Betty Jo Hartley, Logan Hall, Braxton Hallams, Amy Howe, Scarlett Rhodes. Anyone else? I want to remind you that we have our gospel meeting coming up Sunday with Brother David Payton. Spoke to him. He is looking forward to it. He said his family will not be attending with him this time. So we're sad to hear that, but he said that they've got to stay back home. But we are looking forward to that. We have a fellowship meal following our morning service. And then Monday through Thursday Monday through Wednesday we have our meetings at 7 p.m. I want to make you aware of something, and because I found it beneficial. I get an email about once a week, maybe not every week, but about once a week I get an email from a newsletter that Tennessee Bible College puts forth, and you can subscribe to that for free. Just put in your email, and you'll get an email from them that says it's got an article that one of their professors or a preacher or somebody has written in. And it's always been a very good article that I've come across in the times that I've been able to look at it. But one came across this week that I would like to share with you tonight and use it as an extension of our Lord's invitation to you. In 2 Corinthians 2 and verse 1 it says, "Lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." We need to realize that the devil has a plan for each and every one of us. It's a plan that he has almost perfected. We can't see anyone in the world utilize the tools that the devil uses as well as he does. We know the phrase divide and conquer. We've seen it done throughout history. We may have even seen it done in our own lives. No one has mastered it as well as the devil has. He has written the playbook of divide and conquer. Every dictator and leader that wants to use it has done it, even down to the gospel. Divide and conquer is the tactic of the devil. You know, we've seen in recent months, and we've also seen throughout history, communist takeover of countries through the divide and conquer tactic. What happens? You have to demoralize the people, crush the spirit, destroy their hope, destabilize, isolate people, make them suspicious and distrustful, especially of your institution and leaders. Create a crisis, exaggerate a problem, or manufacture one to cause a panic, warn citizens that they cannot save themselves, that there is only solution in radical change, and then normalize evil. Create the illusion that the new culture is the only answer. No matter how absurd or evil it is. Evil is good and good is evil. Normalize that, and you've created a new society. That's the devil's plot that he's used for a long time. He uses it against every single one of us in this room. Satan wants to break our spirits. He wants us to think that the church is nothing but a bunch of hypocrites. That the Bible is confusing and useless to us. And that there's no point that we should continue on. Like it says in Malachi chapter 3 and verse 14, it is useless, it is vain to serve God. That's what the devil wants us to think. The devil also wants to divide and unsettle us. God hates one who sows discord among his brethren, according to Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 19. Satan's purpose is to turn people against each other. He gets into a family and turns the children against the parents and the parents against one another. He rises up in a church and divides Christians with false teaching and personal quarrels. We must heed Paul's warning and not be naive about his tricks. The word devil means the false accuser, the slanderer. The devil also uses crisis to persuade us to give up. Maybe a health problem, an emotional problem, a financial disaster, a stressful relationship, a problem or scandal going on in our life, the death of someone close to us. We need to be mindful that this is the tactic that the devil is using. Jesus warned Peter in Luke chapter 22 and verse 31, Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. When he is successful, the devil convinces fallen Christians that their life has returned to normal. There's no more going to church on Sundays. Use it as a day of rest. Use it as a day of enjoyment. Be like everyone else. That is creating a new normal. But we need to be mindful of what it says in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He has a plan for you. But I want to tell you something as well. God has a plan for you too. God's plan was from the foundation of the world. God's plan is to create life. John 3 and verse 16, a verse that we know so well. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God has a plan for you to bring peace. If you look in Romans chapter 5 and verse 1, therefore being justified by faith, we have peace in God through our Lord Jesus Christ. God has a plan to bring unity. You look at John chapter 19, verse 20 through 22, it tells us that God prayed for his disciples. God prayed for the church. And he says in that verse, wrong chapter, John chapter 17. John chapter 17, verse 20. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me, and the glory which thou gavest me I have given them, that they may be one, even as we are one. God has a plan to bring unity. And God's plan is the only one that saves. John 14 and verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. We can only have unity, peace, and life through Christ Jesus. If you are here tonight and you are following the plan of Satan, you have the opportunity tonight to make your life right. Whether it be through baptism as an alien sinner, whether it be through the second law of pardon for the Christian that has sin in his life. Whatever your need may be, I hope that you will consider this opportunity and don't take advantage take advantage of it in the right way as together as we stand and sing. 655.
fountain free, 'tis for you and me. Let us haste, oh, haste to its free. 'Tis the fount of love from the source of love, and He bids us all freely free. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me. Thirsty soul, hear the welcome call. 'Tis the fountain open for all. There's a rock that's left, and no soul is left, that may not its pure waters shed. 'Tis for you and me, and its stream I see. Let us hasten, joyfully led. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me. Thirsty soul, hear the welcome call. 'Tis the fountain open for all.
Thank you again for being here. Hope to see you Sunday morning. Ron, will you dismiss us?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to come together, study that word. Thank you also for this midweek escape in the outside world, for our thoughts, hearts towards you. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you be with those that we mentioned sick, and be with them, heal them in all the way that you can. We ask you to watch over us for the next one time. Give us wishes in Christ's name we pray. Amen.